He was a man who bought silence, commanded loyalty, and paid for respect. From his private jet to the diamond-encrusted watch on his wrist, Sheikh Tariq al-Jamil's world was curated to his exact specifications. When he walked into London's most exclusive restaurant, he didn't expect service. He expected submission. He saw the waitress Isla as nothing more than a ghost meant to fill his glass. So he insulted her in his native tongue, Arabic confident the words would be a secret poison, felt but not understood. But he made one fatal miscalculation. The quiet waitress understood every single syllable, and her reply in perfect classical Arabic wouldn't just shatter his arrogance, it would unravel an empire. The air in Ethelgard's was like a carefully preserved artifact, still heavy and expensive. It smelled of truffle oil, old money, and the quiet desperation of those trying to belong. For Isla Rosewood, it smelled like survival. For the past year, this Michelin-starred fortress in the heart of Mayfair had been both her sanctuary and her prison. Here she was, a ghost in a crisp black uniform, her movements a silent ballet of efficiency. She could pour a 1982 Chateau Margaux without a single tremor, clear a course of Osetra caviar without a sound, and most importantly, become utterly invisible. Invisibility was a skill she had perfected. Her past was a country she no longer visited, a place of sun-baked courtyards, the scent of cardamom coffee, and a language that felt more like home than English ever did. But in London, that part of her was locked away. Here she was, just Isla, the waitress who was preternaturally calm, whose polite smile never quite reached her stormy grey eyes. Tonight, the weight of the silence in Ethelgard's felt heavier. The arrival of Sheikh Tariq al-Jamil had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. He wasn't just wealthy. He was the kind of powerful that made wealth look like a charming hobby. His family essentially owned a nation's sovereign wealth fund, with controlling interests in everything from global shipping to tech startups. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who had never been told no. Flanked by two sycophants, a man named Faisal and a woman dripping in chopard diamonds, he took the best table in the house. Table 1, the one discreetly tucked into an alcove with a private view of the curated gardens. Isla was assigned his table. Her manager, the perpetually flustered Mr. Henderson, had scurried over, his face pale. "Rosewood, not a single mistake," he'd hissed, adjusting his tie. "This is Sheikh al-Jamil. His bill will likely cover your salary for the next 6 months. Do not speak unless spoken to. Just anticipate." Isla nodded, her expression unreadable. She had served princes, tech billionaires, and politicians who decided the fates of millions. They were all the same men who mistook service for servility. From the moment she approached the table, the sheikh's disdain was a physical force. He didn't look at her, instead continuing his conversation as if she were a piece of furniture. His eyes, the color of dark, polished onyx, scanned the menu with an air of profound boredom. "We will have the tasting menu," he announced to the air in front of him, his English clipped and accented with the expensive polish of a Swiss boarding school education. "And a bottle of the Screaming Eagle, the 2010. Faisal, his companion, snickered. "An excellent choice, Tariq, though perhaps wasted on a place like this." Isla simply inclined her head. "A very fine choice, sir. I will have that brought for you immediately." Her voice was low and steady, a calm island in the sea of his arrogance. For the first time, the sheikh's gaze flickered towards her. It was a brief, dismissive glance, the kind one might give a fly, before swatting it away. He saw a plain woman, her light brown hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face pale under the dim lighting. Utterly unremarkable. He turned back to his guests. The meal progressed in a cloud of quiet tension. Isla moved with practiced invisibility, her service flawless. She presented the wine, decanting it with the precision of a surgeon. She described each of the 12 courses with quiet, professional detachment. Yet with every course, the sheikh's party grew louder, their entitlement expanding to fill every inch of space around them. The final straw came during the dessert course, a delicate sphere of white chocolate that cracked open to reveal a rose lychee mousse. Faisal was telling a story about a yacht party in Monaco, and the sheikh laughed a harsh barking sound. He gestured vaguely in Isla's direction as she refilled his water glass. Then he leaned towards Faisal and spoke in Arabic, his voice low, but carrying in the relative quiet of the alcove. The language so familiar to Isla hit her like a physical blow. "Look at her," he murmured the words, a silken thread of contempt. "Like a statue. These Western women have no soul. You pay them to be ghosts. It's a wonder she can even carry a tray without her empty head getting in the way. Utterly worthless." The words were meant to be a private joke, a casual cruelty, shared in a language he assumed was a shield. He didn't even bother to lower his voice significantly. To him, she was not a person who could possess a secret, let alone the secret of his own language. He saw a uniform, not a life. He saw a servant, not a woman, who had once read al-Mutanabbi's poetry under a desert sky. Isla's hand did not shake. The water poured in a perfect silent stream. She placed the crystal carafe back on the silver tray, her movements fluid, unhurried. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down. The clinking of distant cutlery, the murmur of other diners, the arrogant laughter of his friends, it all faded into a dull roar. All she could hear were his words echoing in the chambers of her hidden past. She straightened her back, her posture impeccable. The ghost had heard him, and the silence was about to be broken. For a long, stretched-out second, Isla did nothing. She stood by the table, a portrait of serene professionalism. The sheikh and his companions had already moved on, their laughter bubbling up again over some new topic. They had forgotten her as easily as they had forgotten the last course they'd consumed. She was simply part of the scenery. But inside her a storm was raging. It was a familiar tempest, one she had learned to quell over the years. It was the anger of being underestimated, the pain of being dismissed, and the deep aching grief for the life she had lost. His words weren't just an insult to a waitress. They were a desecration of a memory. The language he had used to call her worthless was the same language her father had used to tell her she was brilliant, the language of the lullabies her mother had sung. She could have let it go. It was her job. She had endured worse. 1,000 times she had swallowed the casual cruelties of the rich and powerful, converting her dignity into rent money. But this time was different. He hadn't just insulted her. He had used her own hidden world against her. Taking a small, deliberate breath, she turned her body to face the sheikh directly. Not as a servant awaiting an order, but as an equal. Her movement was so subtle, yet so charged with intent, that Faisal's meaningless chatter faltered. The woman with the diamonds looked up, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. Sheikh Tariq al-Jamil, however, didn't notice. He was swirling the last of his wine in his glass, his gaze distant. "Sir," Isla said, her voice still quiet, but now imbued with a new, firm clarity. Her English was, as always, perfect. "Will there be anything else for you this evening, coffee digestifs?" Tariq waved a dismissive hand without looking at her. "Just the bill." "Of course," she replied. She turned to leave, and for a moment he thought the interaction was over. But then she paused. She turned back slightly, her gaze locking directly onto his. The emptiness he had seen in her eyes was gone. In its place was a fire, a clear, intelligent flame that seemed to look right through his title, his wealth and his arrogance, and see the man beneath. Then she spoke. Her voice was just above a whisper, meant for him and him alone. She didn't speak in English. She spoke in the purest, most formal Arabic, a classical dialect so refined it was usually reserved for poetry or diplomatic scripture. It was the language of his grandfather, a language of honor and deep learning. Her words were simple, yet they landed with the force of a perfectly aimed stone. She said, "The empty-headed can still hear." It was just 4 words in his language. Al-Ra'as al-Farig Yasma'u Aidan. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Sheikh Tariq al-Jamil froze. The wine glass in his hand stopped mid-swirl. His entire body went rigid, as if struck by lightning. His dark, mocking eyes widened first in disbelief, then in pure, unadulterated shock. It wasn't just that she had understood him. It was how she had spoken. Her accent wasn't that of a foreigner who had taken a few classes. It was flawless. The pronunciation, the cadence, the subtle lilt, it was the Arabic of the old world of scholars and nobility. It was more perfect than his own. Faisal and the woman stared at him, their faces a canvas of confusion. "Tariq, what is it? What did she say?" the woman asked, her voice shrill. But Tariq couldn't hear her. He was trapped in the waitress's gaze. In that moment, she was no longer a ghost. She was the most solid, most terrifying person in the room. He felt a hot flush of shame creep up his neck, so potent it was almost dizzying. He had been exposed, his arrogance laid bare by the very person he had deemed invisible. It was like boasting of his swimming prowess, only to find he was in the presence of the ocean itself. Isla held his gaze for another second, her expression unyielding. Then, with a quiet, dignified nod, she turned and walked away, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had detonated a bomb and was walking away from the blast zone with perfect composure. Back at the table, a deafening silence had fallen. Faisal was stammering, trying to understand what had happened. Tariq finally broke his paralysis, slamming his wine glass down on the table. A splash of crimson leaped onto the pristine white tablecloth like a drop of blood. "What? Who?" He finally managed to get out his voice, a choked whisper. He looked around the restaurant, but Isla was gone, swallowed back into the clockwork of the establishment. But her presence lingered, her 4 perfect words, echoing in his mind, dismantling everything he thought he knew about power and the people who served him. The billionaire sheikh, the man who commanded nations, had just been utterly and completely conquered by a waitress, and he had no idea what to do next. The kitchen of Ethelgard's was a world away from the hushed opulence of the dining room. It was a cacophony of clanging pans, hissing stoves, and shouted orders in a half-dozen languages. For Isla, it was a place to disappear. She placed the sheikh's bill on the pass for the manager and immediately began polishing cutlery, her hands moving on autopilot. Each fork, each spoon, was a small, tangible task to anchor her in the present, to stop her mind from spinning back to the sheikh's shocked face. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. What had she done? Years of carefully constructed anonymity shattered in a single sentence. She had broken the cardinal rule of her existence. She had allowed herself to be seen. A fellow waitress, a kind Irish girl named Chloe, came over to her. "You all right, Isla? You look like you've seen a ghost. Henderson is having a fit, by the way. Said Table 1's bill is just sitting there." Isla forced a small smile. "I'm fine. Just a headache." But it wasn't a ghost she had seen. It was a ghost she had become. As she polished the silver, her reflection stared back a pale imitation of the girl she once was. The girl who wasn't Isla Rosewood, waitress, but Isla, daughter of Professor Alistair Rosewood, the world's foremost expert on pre-Islamic poetry and Levantine history. Her mind drifted back, pulled by an inescapable tide, to the sprawling courtyard of their home in Damascus. The air there wasn't heavy and conditioned. It was thick with the scent of jasmine and dust, alive with the call to prayer and the distant bargaining of the souk. Her father, Alistair, wasn't a memory then. He was a giant with kind eyes and a laugh that seemed to shake the very foundations of their house. He was a man who saw history not in dusty books, but in the faces of the people in the cadence of their language. He had insisted she learn Arabic, not as a second language, but as a second soul. To truly understand a people, Isla, he would say, his finger tracing the intricate calligraphy in an ancient manuscript, "You must dream in their language." Their dinner table was rarely just the three of them. It was filled with poets, archaeologists, imams, and merchants. She learned the sharp, witty dialect of the marketplace from the baker who brought them fresh ka'ak, and the formal, elegant prose of the Quran from her father's friend, a renowned scholar from Al-Azhar University. Her mother, an artist, had captured it all on canvas, the vibrant chaos of the city, the serene dignity of the desert, the scholarly intensity in her husband's eyes. Their life had been a rich tapestry of two cultures woven together with love and mutual respect. Then the world had fractured. The Arab Spring had bloomed and then withered into a brutal civil war. The city they loved became a battleground. Her father, ever the idealist, believed his work, his connections could help bridge the divide. He stayed too long convinced that culture could triumph over conflict. It was a fatal miscalculation. The night they fled was a blur of smoke, shouting, and the terrifying rumble of distant explosions. Her mother had grabbed only two things: her passport and a small wooden box containing her father's most treasured possession, a set of antique ink pens he claimed once belonged to a famous poet. They had made it to a checkpoint on the outskirts of the city, but their car was stopped. There were angry men with guns. Her father had tried to reason with them, speaking their own dialect, trying to find common ground. But in war, common ground is the first casualty. They had dragged him from the car. The last thing Isla saw of her father was his face not of fear, but of profound, heart-breaking disappointment. They never saw him again. She and her mother made it to London as refugees, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a small box of pens. The grief consumed her mother. She passed away within a year from what the doctors called a broken heart. At 19, Isla was alone, an orphan in a cold, grey city. Her second soul, a secret she had to bury to survive. Her father's academic colleagues offered condolences, but little else. The world moved on, so she took a job, and another, and another. She learned to be invisible to quiet the scholarly, vibrant girl from Damascus and become Isla, the efficient waitress. Ethelgard's was the pinnacle of that invisibility. Here her past couldn't touch her. The language, the memories, they were locked in a vault. Until tonight. Sheikh Tariq al-Jamil, with his casual, entitled cruelty, had unwittingly picked the lock. He had used the language of her father's passion to call her worthless. And in that moment, it wasn't a waitress who answered him. It was Alistair Rosewood's daughter. Chloe's voice cut through the haze of memory. "Hey, Earth to Isla. The Sheikh. He's asking for you." Isla's head snapped up. "What? Yeah, Henderson's practically bowing to him out there. The Sheikh won't let anyone else bring him the bill. He's asking for you by name." "Well, not by name. He just keeps saying the woman who was serving me. He looks weird. Angry, but also spooked. What on earth did you do?" Isla placed the last spoon down its polished surface, reflecting her own wide, uncertain eyes. She didn't know what she had done, but she knew with a terrifying certainty that her life as a ghost was over. When Isla emerged from the kitchen, the atmosphere at Table 1 had changed dramatically. The Sheikh's companions, Faisal and the woman, were gone. Mr. Henderson was hovering nearby, wringing his hands and sweating profusely through his starched shirt. But the epicenter of the storm was Sheikh Tariq al-Jamil himself, sitting alone amidst the ruins of his perfect meal. The table, once a picture of decadent order, was now a landscape of disarray, a crumpled napkin here, the blood-red wine stain there. Tariq was staring at the stain as if it were a map of his own monumental error. When he heard Isla's soft footsteps, his head shot up. The arrogance was gone from his eyes. In its place was a confusing mixture of anger, curiosity, and something else she couldn't quite identify, something that looked almost like fear. "You," he said, his voice low and tight. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit." It wasn't a request. It was a command born of a lifetime of giving them. But for the first time, it lacked its usual conviction. Isla remained standing. "I'm sorry, sir, but staff are not permitted to sit with the guests." Her voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside her. She was back in her uniform, her armor. Mr. Henderson scurried forward. "Rosewood, do as the Sheikh says. Please, Sheikh, forgive her. Leave us." Tariq snapped at Henderson, not even glancing at him. The manager vanished as if he'd been erased. Tariq's gaze returned to Isla. It was intense searching. "I will ask you again. Sit." She weighed her options. Refusing would cause a scene and cost her the job she desperately needed. Complying felt like a surrender. After a moment's hesitation, she gave a stiff, formal nod and perched on the very edge of the velvet-upholstered chair, her back ramrod straight. She was present, but she was not comfortable. She was not his guest. For a long moment, he just studied her, as if trying to reconcile the image of the meek waitress with the woman who had spoken to him with the authority of a queen. "Where did you learn to speak my language like that?" he finally asked, his voice raw. "I had a good teacher." Isla replied, her answer deliberately vague. His frustration was palpable. He was a man used to direct answers to information being served to him on a silver platter. "A good teacher. Do not play games with me. Your accent, it is from another time. Who are you?" "I am the person who served you your dinner, sir," she said, her tone cool and professional. She was refusing to give him anything. He had treated her as a nobody, and now that he was curious, she was determined to remain one. He leaned forward, his frustration warring with a dawning, grudging respect. "I apologize," he said, the words sounding foreign and clumsy on his tongue. "What I said, it was unbecoming." It was the best he could manage, an apology filtered through layers of pride. Isla simply nodded, accepting it as one might accept a package delivered to the wrong address. It didn't belong to her. The insult had been for a ghost, and the apology was for a mystery he was trying to solve. Neither had anything to do with the real Isla. "Your bill, sir," she said, placing the leather folio on the table, gently pushing it over the wine stain. She was steering the conversation back to the only relationship they had, customer and server. He ignored it. "I will pay for the damages, and I will offer you compensation for the offense." He was back on familiar ground, now money. Money solved everything. "Name a price." A flicker of genuine anger finally broke through Isla's composure. "My dignity is not for sale, sir." The quiet power of her statement silenced him again. He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes, but also the unyielding strength in her jaw. He saw the worn collar of her uniform, but also the aristocratic set of her shoulders. She was a walking contradiction. "I need to know." He said, his voice quieter now, driven by a compulsion he didn't understand. "It is a matter of honor." "Whose honor, sir? Yours or mine?" She countered her question, hanging in the air between them. Before he could answer, she stood up. "If there is nothing else, I must return to my duties." She walked away, leaving him alone at the table with the bill and his unanswered questions. Tariq watched her go, a feeling of profound frustration rising within him. He had offered money, the universal key that opened every door he had ever encountered, and she had refused it. He had offered an apology, a rarity for him, and she had dismissed it. He picked up the bill, his mind racing. He signed it, adding a tip that was so absurdly large it was more of an insult than a compliment, a desperate, clumsy attempt to reassert his power. But as he stood to leave, he knew it was a hollow gesture. As he was escorted out by a groveling Mr. Henderson, Tariq glanced back into the dining room. He saw Isla at a service station, calmly folding napkins, her expression serene. She looked like just another waitress again. But he knew better. She was a fortress, and he had only seen the outer walls. That night, Sheikh Tariq al-Jamil didn't go back to his penthouse suite at the Dorchester. He went to his private office, a secure room with technology that could track global stock markets in real time. He picked up a secure phone and called the head of his personal security, a formidable ex-MI6 agent named Arthur Pence. "Arthur," Tariq said, his voice cold and determined. "I have a name for you. Isla Rosewood. She works at Ethel Guards in Mayfair. I want to know everything. Where she was born, who her parents were, where she learned to speak Arabic better than I do. Everything. And I want it on my desk by morning." His obsession had begun. He would unlock the mystery of the waitress, not with money, but with the other tool he had in abundance power. The next morning, a sleek encrypted tablet was delivered to Tariq's penthouse. On it was Arthur Pence's report. Tariq dismissed his morning appointments, locked the door to his study, and began to read. He expected to find a story of intrigue. Perhaps she was a corporate spy, a translator from a rival family, or something equally clandestine. The truth, when it came, was far more profound and humbling. The file began with the mundane Isla Rosewood, born in London, citizen of the United Kingdom. No criminal record, no social media presence, a ghost in the digital age. But as Tariq scrolled further, the black and white text began to paint a picture in color. Her father, Professor Alistair Rosewood. The name hit Tariq like a physical blow. He didn't just know the name, he revered it. His own grandfather, Sheikh Rashid, The formidable patriarch who had built their family's empire from desert sand and sheer will had spoken of Professor Rosewood. He had called him one of the few Westerners who truly understood the soul of their culture, a man who saw the beauty in their history beyond the oil in their ground. His grandfather had owned a first-edition signed copy of Rosewood's seminal work, The Echoes of the Empty Quarter, a book on pre-Islamic poetry. It was one of the few things from the old man's library that Tariq had kept and cherished. He read on his hands, trembling slightly. The report detailed the professor's life in Damascus, his marriage to an English artist, and the birth of their only daughter, Isla. It included photographs. One showed a young, smiling girl with bright, intelligent eyes, sitting on her father's lap, in a sun-drenched library, an open Arabic text between them. The resemblance was unmistakable. Then came the tragedy. The war. The flight from Damascus. The professor's disappearance presumed dead at a rebel checkpoint. The file detailed Isla and her mother's arrival in London as asylum seekers, the mother's subsequent death, and Isla's descent into a life of low-wage jobs to make ends meet. She wasn't a spy. She was a survivor. She was an orphan of a world that Tariq's own geopolitical maneuverings had helped to shape. He felt a wave of shame so powerful it made him physically ill. The insult he had thrown so casually at a waitress was not just an insult to her, but a deep and profound desecration of her father's memory. He had called the daughter of Alistair Rosewood, a man his own grandfather considered a peer empty-headed and worthless. He had mocked her soul in the very language her father had taught her to love. The report concluded with a final devastating detail. Arthur Pence had discovered that Isla had recently been served an eviction notice. The building she lived in, a run-down block in a forgotten corner of East London, had been bought by a new property development corporation. They were clearing out the old tenants to make way for luxury flats. Tariq scrolled to the name of the corporation. It was a subsidiary, a tiny, insignificant branch of a much larger real estate portfolio. A portfolio owned by Al Jamil Holdings, owned by him. The tablet slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the marble floor. He was not just the man who had insulted her. He was the man who was about to make her homeless. His casual, thoughtless business dealings were about to finish the job that the war had started erasing the last vestiges of her world. The arrogance, the pride, the obsession, it all melted away, replaced by a single, crushing weight of responsibility. This was no longer about a bruised ego or a solved mystery. This was about honor, just as she had said. His honor. The honor of his family. His grandfather would be ashamed beyond words. He stood up, pacing the room like a caged tiger. For the first time in his life, Sheikh Tariq al-Jamil felt truly powerless. Money couldn't fix this. An apology was laughably insufficient. He had broken something, and he had no idea how to put it back together. He picked up the phone, his mind made up. He wasn't going to send an emissary or a lawyer. He wasn't going to send a check. He had to face her himself. He called Mr. Henderson at Ethelgard's. "I need to speak to Isla Rosewood," he said, his voice devoid of its usual command, replaced by a raw urgency. "It is not a request." He had to find her. He had to try to make this right, not for his own pride, but for the memory of a great man, and for the daughter he had so grievously wronged. Isla was in the middle of her shift polishing wine glasses behind the bar when Mr. Henderson approached her, his face a mask of nervous reverence. "Rosewood," he whispered, "Sheikh Al-Jamil is here. He is asking for you. He says it's urgent." A cold dread washed over Isla. She had hoped last night was the end of it, a bizarre and dangerous episode that she could now bury. His reappearance felt like a threat. "I am working, Mr. Henderson. He has booked out the entire restaurant," Henderson said, his voice cracking. "For the next 3 hours. It's empty. He only wants to speak to you." Isla looked past her manager and saw that he was right. The bustling dining room was eerily silent. The tables were all perfectly set, but completely empty. And at table 1, the scene of last night's confrontation, sat Sheikh Tariq al-Jamil. Alone. With a heavy heart, she untied her apron and walked towards him. This time, as she approached, he stood up. It was a simple gesture, but it was a profound sign of respect, and it immediately set a different tone. He wasn't wearing an immaculate suit today. He was dressed in simple, well-tailored trousers and a dark cashmere sweater. He looked less like a sheikh and more like a man carrying a heavy burden. "Miss Rosewood," he began, and the use of her proper name was another shock. "Thank you for seeing me. Please sit." She sat, her posture still wary, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I know who you are," he said softly. "I know you are the daughter of Professor Alistair Rosewood." Isla flinched, as if he had struck her. He had invaded her past the one thing she had left that was truly hers. "You had me investigated," she stated, her voice cold with accusation. "I did," he admitted, meeting her gaze without flinching. "And what I found has left me deeply ashamed. My grandfather, Sheikh Rashid, he admired your father greatly. He considered him a friend. The books your father wrote are in my family's library. They are treasures." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "What I said to you last night was an unforgivable offense under any circumstances. But knowing who you are, knowing that I insulted the daughter of a man my family holds in such high esteem, I have dishonored my grandfather's memory. I have dishonored your father's. For that I offer you my most profound and sincere apology. There is no excuse for my arrogance." His words were genuine. There was no artifice, no pride, only a deep, clear well of remorse in his eyes. Isla looked at him, the armor of her anger beginning to crack. For so long her father's legacy had been a private grief. To hear him spoken of with such reverence by this man, the man who had hurt her, was disorienting. Before she could formulate a response, his phone sitting on the table buzzed urgently. He glanced at it, his brow furrowing in irritation. "Forgive me," he said, about to silence it, but the name on the screen made him pause. He answered his voice immediately, shifting back to the sharp tone of a CEO. "What is it, Karim?" he snapped. He listened for a moment, his face growing dark. "What do you mean the deal is off?" The Al-Saudis wouldn't back out now. A cultural insult. What cultural insult? A mistranslation. He stood up, turning away from Isla and beginning to pace. His voice was a low, angry growl. "A gift." What gift? A set of antique pens. How could that be an insult? The inscription read it. "To me, read it. To me now." He fell silent again, listening intently. As he did, his face went pale. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure desperation. No. That proverb, it can be taken 2 ways. One of respect, one of deep insult. They chose the latter. Who approved that translation? Get him on the phone now. This deal is worth $500 million. It holds the key to our entire green energy initiative. Fix it. He hung up, slamming the phone down on the table. He looked at Isla, his eyes wild with a new kind of crisis. "My apologies," he said, his voice strained. "A business emergency." Isla had overheard everything. Antique pens, a mistranslated proverb, an insult causing a deal with a powerful Saudi family to collapse. A spark of recognition flickered in her mind. "What was the proverb?" she asked, her voice quiet. Tariq looked at her, distracted. "What?" "The inscription on the pens. The proverb that was mistranslated. What was it?" she insisted. He looked surprised by her question, but he answered, rattling it off in frustrated Arabic before translating. "The ink of the scholar is more sacred than the blood of the martyr." It was meant as a sign of respect for their patriarch's wisdom. Isla's blood ran cold. She knew that proverb. Her father had taught it to her, and she knew its dangerous dual meaning. To a modern, business-focused leader, it was a compliment. But to a traditional honor-bound family with a proud warrior lineage, it could be interpreted as a grave insult, implying their scholarly pursuits were valued above the sacrifices of their ancestors. It suggested they were weak. "Who is the patriarch of the family you are dealing with?" she asked, her mind working quickly. "Sheikh Abdullah Al Saud," Tariq replied impatiently. "Why?" "Sheikh Abdullah is a traditionalist," Isla said, her voice gaining strength and authority. "His great-grandfather was a renowned warrior. His family's honor is built on a legacy of strength, not just wisdom. Giving him that gift with that inscription, you didn't just insult him. You insulted his entire lineage." Tariq stared at her, stunned into silence. In the space of 30 seconds, she had shown a more profound understanding of his world's complex cultural politics than his entire team of highly paid advisors. He was in the middle of a corporate war, one he was about to lose. And he realized with a sudden, shocking clarity that the only person who might have the weapon to win it was sitting right in front of him, the waitress he had called worthless. The hushed, cathedral-like silence of Ethel guards transformed. The dining room moments before a symbol of opulent leisure became an impromptu war room for a battle being fought 1,000 miles away. The perfectly set tables stood like silent witnesses, their polished silverware gleaming under the soft lights, a stark contrast to the chaotic high-stakes crisis unfolding at Table 1. Sheikh Tariq al-Jamil, a man who commanded boardrooms and influenced global markets, was now a subordinate, his empire's fate hanging on the words of a woman whose name he didn't even know how to pronounce correctly, just hours earlier. The $500 million energy deal was more than a transaction. It was his declaration of a new future for his family, a pivot from the oil that had built their past to the sustainable technology that would secure their legacy. To fail now, and to fail because of a cultural blunder, would be an unforgivable, career-defining humiliation. Isla Rosewood, however, was in her element. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued her for years began to recede, replaced by a crystalline focus she hadn't felt since her last debate with her father in his Damascus study. This was not a restaurant anymore. It was a complex intellectual puzzle, a delicate negotiation of honor, history, and language. It was her home ground. "How could you possibly know this?" Tariq pressed his voice, a raw blend of desperation and burgeoning awe. "About Sheikh Abdullah's history, his sensitivities. My intelligence team has files on him thick enough to stop a bullet." "Your team reads reports." "Sheikh," Isla replied, her tone respectful but firm. The authority in her voice was natural, effortless. "They see a name, a net worth a list of political alliances. My father taught me to see a man's lineage. He believed history wasn't a static record. It was a living river, flowing through the veins of every person. I met Sheikh Abdullah at a symposium in Riyadh when I was 12. He and my father spoke for an hour about a single line of pre-Islamic poetry. I remember Sheikh Abdullah was far more interested in the poet's tribal loyalties and battle record than the poem's literary merit. He is a man who sees the world through the lens of strength and honor, first art and commerce second. Tariq sank back into his chair, the full weight of his team's failure crashing down on him. My advisors, they are fools. They celebrated the gift of the pens as a masterstroke of diplomacy. Elegant, scholarly, respectful. Those were the words they used. They weren't entirely wrong, Isla conceded, pacing slowly beside the table. The gesture was scholarly, but in their world, a world of contracts and capital, they've forgotten that some men still live in a world of symbols. For a man like Sheikh Abdullah, a symbol is not a representation of a thing. It is the thing. You didn't give him an insulting gift. You declared that his wisdom was more valuable than his strength, that his pen was mightier than his ancestors' swords. You challenged the very foundation of his house's pride. A new sense of purpose, clear and powerful, ignited within her. But this can be fixed, she said, her mind racing. An insult delivered through a symbol must be answered with a symbol of even greater power. An apology is insufficient. It must be an act of profound deference, something that rebalances the scales of honor. She stopped pacing and looked at him. The pens you sent, what were they exactly? Ottoman era, from the court of Suleiman the Magnificent, Tariq said. Quill pens inlaid with mother-of-pearl and silver filigree. They are museum-quality pieces. Was it a complete set? She asked, a specific idea beginning to form. Yes, a scribe's box with 4 pens. They're in my private vault in the city. Get them, Isla commanded. The word was not impertinent. It was necessary. There was no time for pleasantries. Tariq, without a flicker of hesitation, pulled out his phone and spoke a few sharp words in Arabic to his head of security. The efficiency of his power was breathtaking. He didn't need to give an address or an explanation. He simply gave an order, and the world reshaped itself to his will. Less than 20 minutes later, 2 stern-faced men in discreetly tailored suits entered the restaurant, carrying a heavy, climate-controlled case. They placed it on the table, bowed to Tariq, and vanished. Isla opened the case. Nestled in black velvet were 3 more pens, each one an exquisite testament to a forgotten era of artistry. She lifted one, its weight cool and substantial in her hand. The insult was delivered in ink, she murmured, her strategy crystallizing. The apology must be written with it. But it cannot be your ink, your words. It must be his. She laid out her plan. It was audacious, bordering on reckless from a Western business perspective, but from a cultural standpoint, it was flawless. It was a maneuver steeped in tradition, a gesture of absolute trust that would either be seen as an act of genius or an act of utter madness. As she spoke, Tariq's expression shifted from panicked desperation to sheer, unadulterated admiration. He was no longer looking at a waitress. He was looking at a grand master of a game he was only just beginning to understand. He secured the video conference. His assistant, speaking in hushed, urgent tones over the phone, initially reported that Sheikh Abdullah refused to even consider it. But when Tariq instructed him to relay a new message, that the call was regarding a matter of grave dishonor that could only be rectified by Sheikh Tariq's personal submission, a time was granted in 30 minutes. The wait was agonizing. Tariq paced his office, a sleek, modern space of glass and steel that now felt like a cage. Isla sat calmly, her hands folded in her lap, a portrait of unnerving serenity. "Are you certain of this, Isla?" Tariq asked, pausing to look at her. "To give him a blank slate. He could ruin us. He could write terms that would cripple our energy division before it even begins." "He could," Isla agreed calmly. "But he won't. Men of true honor do not abuse an act of submission. They reward it. By giving him the power to write the terms, you are telling him that you trust his honor more than you trust your own lawyers. You are handing him back the sword you unintentionally tried to take from him. He will not use it to kill you. He will use it to knight you." The screen flickered to life. Sheikh Abdullah Al Saud's face appeared, filling the large monitor. He was exactly as Isla remembered, a man whose face seemed carved from desert rock, his eyes holding the immense, patient wisdom of a falcon. He looked severe, deeply displeased, and utterly unforgiving. "Sheikh Tariq," he began, his voice a low rumble. "My schedule is not accustomed to accommodating the cleanup of diplomatic messes. You have 5 minutes to explain this personal submission." Tariq took a breath, glancing for a split second at Isla, who gave him a barely perceptible nod. He began speaking not the transactional English of their previous dealings, but the formal poetic Arabic Isla had coached him in. "Venerable Sheikh Abdullah, pillar of your house," Tariq started, his voice resonating with a humility that was entirely genuine. "I have not called to offer a simple apology, for an apology presumes a mere mistake. What I have done is far worse. Through the blindness of my own ignorance, I have committed an act of profound disrespect against you, your father, and your father's father. For this grave offense, I have come not to apologize, but to beg your forgiveness." The old sheikh's stern expression did not change, but a flicker of surprise registered in his sharp eyes. The flawless formality of the language and the depth of the humility were unexpected. Tariq continued, his words flowing as Isla had instructed. "The gift I sent was the gesture of a fool who reads the first page of a history and thinks he understands the whole epic. I sought to honor the scholar in you, and in my arrogance I failed to see the great warrior whose blood consecrates your very name. I honored the ink and dishonored the blood. It is a mistake a boy would make, not a man who wishes to be your partner." He signaled for the velvet box to be brought into the camera's view and opened it, revealing the 3 remaining pens. "These are the brothers of the pens I sent you. They are beautiful, but they are hollow shells without the wisdom to fill them. I have come to a painful realization, Sheikh. My ink is worthless in this matter." He paused, gathering himself for the final audacious move. "I am sending these remaining pens to you by private courier. I ask that you use them with your own revered ink to write the terms of a new agreement between our houses. An agreement that you and you alone feel properly honors your legacy and your trust. Whatever terms you write, I will sign them, unseen. My family from this day forward places its faith not in contracts and clauses, but in the unshakable honor of the House of Al Saud." A heavy electric silence filled the office. It was an unprecedented gamble, a complete surrender of leverage. Tariq had laid his $500 million legacy at the feet of the man he had offended. Sheikh Abdullah stared from the screen, his expression unreadable. He was processing the sheer audacity of the move, weighing the sincerity, searching for the trap. Then his gaze shifted just for a moment to the side of the camera in the direction of where Isla was sitting unseen. A long, slow, knowing glimmer entered his eyes. He had seen the move, and now he was looking for the hand of the player. Finally, he spoke, his voice no longer harsh, but laced with a new, deep curiosity. "That is the most reckless and the most honorable proposition I have heard in my 60 years, Sheikh Tariq. It is the wager of a desert warrior, not a city merchant. You speak today with a wisdom that seems to have been born overnight. Tell me, who is your new teacher?" Tariq looked at Isla, who gave a single slow nod. There would be no more hiding. "My teacher," he said, his voice clear and strong, "is the person who opened my eyes to the depth of my own ignorance. A woman of great learning and greater honor, to whom I now owe an incalculable debt." A slow, genuine smile finally spread across Sheikh Abdullah's weathered face, transforming his severe features. "Alistair Rosewood," he murmured more to himself than to Tariq. "I see his echo. The ink of the scholar, it seems, can indeed guide the hand of the warrior. Very well, Tariq. Send me the pens. I will write the terms of our new friendship." The screen went blank. For a full minute, Tariq did not move. He simply stared at the blank monitor, the enormity of what had just transpired washing over him. The deal wasn't just saved, it was forged into something stronger, an alliance built not on profit, but on a profound act of restored honor. He finally leaned back in his chair, a long, shuddering breath escaping him. He turned to Isla, his eyes filled with a raw emotion she had never seen in any man. A potent cocktail of relief, gratitude, and pure, unadulterated awe. I have no words," he stammered. "You saved me. You saved everything. How can I possibly repay you?" Isla met his gaze, her own calm finally returning. "Repayment is a term for a transaction, Sheikh. This was a matter of honor." She paused, then added her voice, quiet but firm. "But there is something you can do. The eviction notice for the residents of the St. Jude's building in Hackney. I want it cancelled. Permanently." Tariq looked confused for a second, before the information from Arthur Pence's report clicked into place, the final piece of his shame. "Done," he said without hesitation. "It's more than cancelled. I'll sign the entire building over to a tenant's trust. It's theirs, free and clear." He stood up and walked over to her, his expression deadly serious. "But that is a pittance. That is not enough. This," he said, gesturing around his opulent office, "is not your life, Isla. Scrubbing floors and serving men like me. You are a queen without a kingdom." He stopped in front of her. "I'm offering you a new position, not a job, a role. Senior Cultural and Strategic Advisor to the Chairman of Al Jamil Holdings. You will answer only to me. I will give you a limitless budget to create a new foundation in your father's name, dedicated to preserving the cultural heritage he loved. You will guide our company's relationships across the Middle East. You will have a platform, a voice, and the resources to reclaim the world that was stolen from you." It was a staggering offer. It was a path back to the life she thought was lost forever. But it was a path being offered by the very man who had so cruelly reminded her of her loss. She looked at him, seeing not the arrogant sheikh or the grateful CEO, but a man who had been irrevocably changed. "I will accept," she said, her voice clear and steady, leaving no room for negotiation. "On my own terms." "On any terms you wish," Tariq replied instantly, his voice filled with sincere conviction. A small, true smile finally graced Isla Rosewood's lips, reaching her stormy grey eyes for the first time in years. The ghost of Ethelgard's was gone. The daughter of Alistair Rosewood had returned, and her legacy was just beginning to be written. And so a single sentence spoken in a language of honor changed everything. Isla Rosewood walked out of Ethelgard's for the last time, leaving behind the ghost of a waitress and stepping into a future she would build herself. She didn't just save a $500 million deal. She resurrected a legacy. Sheikh Tariq al-Jamil, the man who thought he could buy the world, learned a priceless lesson that true worth is not measured in wealth, but in wisdom, and true power lies not in being heard, but in understanding. Their story reminds us that beneath the surface of the ordinary, extraordinary lives are waiting. Every person you meet has a history. You cannot see a silent strength you cannot measure. A little respect can change a life. A little arrogance can cost an empire. What did you think of Isla's incredible journey? Do you believe one moment of standing up for yourself can change your destiny? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of hidden strength and unexpected justice. Thank you for listening.